And I'm like, that's fine. You can like what you like, right? And so it's just,
Yeah, I don't understand it, but
yeah, Pokemon cards or whatever, right? And so
Beanie Babies and
yeah, it's always like something. But I'm like, people like what they like, and who am I to judge?
And there we are. Hello, hello, everybody. Another episode of Open Action with John McClain, presented by Armscor Precision. I am, of course, John McClain, and my guest for this episode has a very, very interesting background and into what he does now. And the only reason I know that is because I've known this guy for a very long time, because he's actually married to one of my cousins. So we start off with what I know about him, which is that he started out as a break dancer, a b-boy, and
Yeah.
then from there he got into building AKs with Jim Fuller over at Rifle Dynamics. Became one of like their head AK com block specialists over there. Then he expanded, started his own company now called Ironborn Armory, where he also makes knives. And his knives are having to do with his name, which is Billy Cho Knives. So my guest is Billy Cho. What's up, Billy?
What's going on, John? It's been a little while.
It's been a long while, yeah, especially since we're neither one of us is in Vegas anymore. You and Esther left Vegas a long time ago, and now I get why. After I moved to Missouri, I was like, oh, because Vegas sucks.
Yeah, I mean, we left Vegas in 2015, so it feels like it wasn't that long ago, but it was like technically 8 years ago now. So, yeah, it's like I said, Vegas will always be home. I'm sure it's the same as you, but it's not a good place to raise kids. You know what I mean? So yeah, the Vegas always, there's always the glitz and glamour, and everyone always goes there in our industry for SHOT Show and things like that. But it's they bring all these cool things, to the city, like great restaurants and chains and stuff like that, just to hide the fact that it's really a crap town. You know what I mean? So it's but
Well, and but I'll say this: like when we grew up in Vegas, it was a different city than it is now. So, like,
100%.
our parents raising us in Vegas was not considered cruel and unusual. Like, we
Right.
had grass in our front yard, we had grass in our backyard, we had swimming
Yeah.
pools. We were like, we used to jump on our bikes and ride 3 neighborhoods over to go hang out with friends, and our parents used to kick us out and lock the door behind them, right? So
Yeah.
you
I
just
mean,
can't do
yeah,
that anymore.
yeah. I mean, we were like the last generation that really didn't spend our time on the internet and stuff like that. And so, yeah, it was a very different time. And, I have this love-hate relationship with Vegas because, it did provide opportunities for our family members who are immigrants and getting jobs at casinos and things like that. But, I mean, as far as like education-wise, my friend was valedictorian for one of the high schools there. And when he went to college, everyone was like, dude, you guys from Vegas are dumb. You can't write, you can't talk, you can't do anything to hang out, basically hang in basic college.
That's
So,
hella whack. And I remember the first time I was on tour with my band, and the first time I said hella on the East Coast, like 6 people stopped what they were doing and looked at me and went, "Did you just say hella?" I'm like, "Yeah, why?" And they're like, "What the heck? What does that mean?" I'm like, "You've
right.
never heard that term?" Yeah, so
Yeah, the funny thing is you're in Missouri now, which is one of the big culture shocks when I went to Missouri. I went to college in Missouri, and that was a big culture shock leaving Vegas for the first time and living in Missouri for college, where I'm like, hey, where are the slot machines? I mean, what do you mean gas stations close? I mean, it's like,
yes.
yeah, I mean, what do you mean you can't buy a beer after 10 o'clock or something like that? It's like, it was a big culture shock and a big, kind of also gave me the love for the outdoors, which I'm sure you're enjoying right now as well, you know?
I It took me 34 years to realize that I like killing deer. Not just the fact of killing. Understand that that's not just the act, but the whole aspect of learning about the deer, trying to figure them out, trying to figure out what goes on in their head, why they're going to do what they're going to do, and how to be in the right spot to allow that interaction to happen. And then, of course, to fill the freezer, because like I don't just kill the deer and then leave it there, or I actually process it and put it in my freezer and then eat them throughout the year. So But no, I absolutely like, and that was a huge catalyst. That I go turkey hunting, even though, well, I don't actually go turkey hunting. I just take my shotgun for hikes because I haven't killed a turkey yet. But dove hunting is coming up too. That starts on the 1st. So that'll be a new venture for me. I tried it last year, and it was like I said, just me taking my gun for a walk. But yeah, I absolutely love it.
Hiding in a fake tent for like hours and days at a time, right? And
yeah, but you know, so there was maybe it was last year or 2 years ago. We had like this drop in deer activity in the property that I was hunting, and when I was out there, I got a text message from Kelly, and she was like, why are you out there? We know there's nothing out there because there's nothing been showing up on our cameras. But it was, for me, it was like, well, I'm out here because I want to be out here, like to sneak in before everything starts to wake up, and then for the wildlife to wake up and not realize I'm there. You just kind of it's kind of cool to see wild animals doing wild animal shit. Like,
oh yeah, for sure. Yeah, I shot my first deer like 3 years ago, which is kind of unique for people in our industry, right? Because everyone grew up hiking and going into the woods, and you and I grew up in a very urban environment where that's like, oh no, Bambi, like what? Like you're just getting our meat from supermarkets and stuff like that. And so that's one of the big things about, like, even me as a knife maker, I'm kind of am one of the only guys that kind of grew up in an urban environment doing what I do now, right? All the other guys are like, yeah, I had a knife since I was 5 years old, and I would go get lost in the woods. But I'm like, I grew up, and it was 110 outside in Vegas, and we'd just go riding our bikes around and go to Walmart and steal stuff, stuff like that,
Allegedly. We would allegedly steal stuff.
Yeah, just borrow stuff. We were, that's the stuff that urban kids did. Just, and it's a very unique thing, right? And yeah, so very much latchkey kids as well. And so, yeah, it was 100% different than being a latchkey kid in the countryside. So.
Oh yeah, for sure, absolutely. Yeah, the culture shock was big, but see, for me though, it was kind of cool because we got to experience where I'm at now a couple times when, there are certain things about COVID I miss. Like I miss social distancing. I miss mandatory seats being, middle seats being required to stay open on airplanes, right?
Yeah.
And so we got to travel back and forth a couple times from Vegas here to visit Kelly's family. And each time I came, I was like, yeah, I could see myself living here. This place is pretty awesome. And then when I looked at the cost of living for like buying a house here, I was like, oh my God, are you kidding me? Ridiculous. Yes, absolutely. Let's go.
Right.
Unfortunately, the joke I always say to people was like, well, yeah, I came here from Vegas and then Vegas followed me because now gas is the same price it was in Vegas when I left here. The inflation and everything just keeps going up. So I'm literally like, my dollar is almost as good as it was in Vegas. But what that also means is that if I was still in Vegas, man, we'd be doing this podcast and I'd be in my car because that's where I'd be living.
right.
Yeah.
So that's the thing. I guess I mentioned, but I moved to Oregon, and same thing when we visited here. It was absolutely beautiful, right? It's like Narnia out here, where it's people think it's like Sleepless in Seattle, where it rains 99% of the time. It really doesn't. It rains a lot in the wintertime, but most of the time it's like a misty rain. It doesn't ever like downpour or thunderstorm out here very much. The summertime, it rains maybe once a month, if that, right? So, but I mean, it's just, you get the highest it ever gets usually in the summertime here would be like mid 80s, and it's usually in the 70s, and sun rises at 5, sun sets at 10 up here because we're higher up. So, the kids will go to bed like at 9 or something, and they're like, it's still bright outside, and so.
Yep.
But we just fell in love with how beautiful it is out here. Again, big culture change where in Vegas, everyone's in a rush, right? It's a big concrete jungle. Everyone's trying to get to work or leave work, and the freeways.
And no one left early, so everyone is. Yeah, I need to get there first. It's like
right, so high stress.
Yeah,
but when you drive in, in the countryside or where there's a lot of trees and woods, you're like, I don't mind the drive. I don't mind taking my time, and and people let people in when they signal and stuff like that, which is people don't honk their horns out here, which is weird, really weird. You cut them off, you see their hand like this above the horn, but they don't press it.
Yeah.
So it's just a big culture shock, and it was something that we wanted for our kids and have them grow up and get wild and jump in the river and go get lost in the woods as well. Like basically give them the childhood that we wanted for ourselves, right? That we didn't really know. So
Yeah, basically we're all now just trying to give our kids the Bluey life. I don't know if you watch Bluey, and for anyone that doesn't watch Bluey, I'm telling you, even as an adult, watch Bluey. It's a great show. If you want to have kids, it's a great show for you to learn how emulate how to be a good parent. If you don't want to have kids, it's still funny as hell because everyone that has kids, you'd be like, "Yep, I've seen them have to deal with that."
Yeah. I mean, my kid. I think I'm a pretty good dad. Being a dad is my passion, and biggest reason why I do the things I do today. But when I watch Bluey, I'm like, I am a horrible father compared to this guy. What is going on?
I have to, WWBD. What would Bandit do? Every time, the little one for us, and she'll play the games that they do on Bluey. So at least I know how to play the game. But
Sure.
Man, sometimes it's just hard to be like, do I really have to, pretend like you're a moving statue, and every time I move you somewhere, you disappear when I turn around? Like, it's like, I don't know. Yeah, like you said, sometimes you're just like, I understand it's a cartoon, it's a show, it's fake, and so he has an unlimited amount of energy versus us in the real world. Like sometimes you're just kind of like, I just don't feel like playing right now. But even then, even though sometimes I just kind of have to remind myself, like, hey, guess what? When she's grown up, that's it. It's done. So maybe you just sacrifice a little bit now so you don't regret it later. Because for this kid around versus my first kid, I feel like with Scarlett, my first daughter, I was in a rush. I was like, start crawling, start walking. Let's get you out of diapers. I wanted her to be self-sufficient sooner because maybe I was still a little bit in a selfish mindset as a human. So this time around, it's been cool to have a different perspective of appreciate her not being able to walk, appreciate her not appreciate all the baby talk. She mispronounces words. You can correct it every now and then, but at the same time, you're gonna miss the way she doesn't know how to say spaghetti. So a little different.
That's funny because it's become more of a parent podcast now. But yeah, I mean that's the thing. My story is that I've lost both parents pretty early, so that's always on the back of my mind. And it's a crazy story about what happened to my dad, which you're involved with. But
I didn't do anything. Like, I did a positive thing. Don't make it sound like
Yes.
I put him in a rear naked chokehold while we were sparring one day. And
No. So the gist of the story is that I did an article for ITS Tactical where it's called "Lock Picking Saved My Dad's Life," and basically the gist of it was something happened with my dad physically, and John was a EMT at the time, and so I called him when there was an emergency that happened with my dad, and all that being said, but from that incident, my dad probably passed away about 6 months after that incident. But my mom also died when I was 16, so that's always on the back of my mind where I was like, oh, I wish I maybe spent more time with her, or just have a ton of regret when you're that young, right? And when I had kids, I'm always like, oh, I don't want them to feel like I wasn't there, right? I don't want to ever yell at my kid where I'm busy working and telling them, oh no, I'm busy, leave me alone, because all they want to do is hang out with me. It's like and they don't understand. And as much as you work and you think you're providing for them and that's your duty as a parent, it is. But a lot of it, when it comes down to it, you pretty much say, hey, it's not worth it at the end, right? Because that dollar, that $1,000, that $10,000 won't buy a single minute of time, right? Back. And you have daughters, and when they become teenagers, they want nothing to do with you, right? And so
Yeah.
And so, I mean, you have a very limited time with them, and hopefully they come back when they're in their 20s and all that. But um, yeah, that was the thing. Like, I wish, like, my dad probably spent more time with me. Like, to me, I have very few memories of him, minus him working all the time. And again, I didn't want that for my kids either. So that's the thing. Everyone always says you got to hustle, hustle, hustle in this generation, especially as an entrepreneur. And at this point, I actually run 4 businesses, and so all by myself. I have one employee, but try to spend as much time with my kids as possible. So I always, try to make them breakfast for school or take them to school, and always say goodnight, even though I'm busy or whatever. I always try to spend at least one day a week with them, with activities, playing games or whatever. But that's one of the benefits of working at home, right? Because you're just right in the other room or right outside, or my shop's outside my home, and I get to poop in my own toilet. That's like the best thing ever, right? I see that all the time. It's just the
Yes.
best thing, it's like, you know, um, but yeah, and you get to spend time with your kids, right? I mean, you can make them lunch, you can stop whatever, and uh, and just hang out with them, right? So it's pretty awesome.
Yeah, I saw a quote the other day that was pretty uh, pretty deep and meaningful for me when I read it, and it was the idea. It was it said like when you're gone, the only people that remember you worked late were your kids.
Hmm.
Like your boss won't care. It's like
Yeah.
they won't remember that. Oh yes, he used to work late all the time. He was such a great person for that. Like so.
Right.
Um, and yeah, I think with the whole aspect of you got to hustle, make that green and stuff. I also think that kind of might get a little lost in translation because it's the the hustle is to make money, but it's also to do it the smart way, not to do it the super hard. I'm gonna work myself to the bone kind of way. So that's kind of what I think when that comes down to it. People just kind of get confused, thinking like, "Oh, that just means I have to work really. I have to stay out and constantly be making money." In reality, it's like, well, we should be trying to do things for ourselves. I'm trying to start a holster company right now, so that's
Right.
been an interesting thing. It's like the whole thing of like, man, I don't have any orders today. This sucks. But then orders come in, and all of a sudden it's like, oh my gosh, I've got to make 20 packages and send them out, in a timely manner and stuff. And so you're just busy as hell. But
Yeah.
well, with that being said, I'll tell you what. Yes, we have gone to a parent podcast. Let's kind of get back to a little bit about what's going on because you, like I said in your intro, you started out with Rifle Dynamics, building AKs under the tutelage of Jim Fuller, who apparently didn't like retirement because he went to Phoenix and reopened up a new shop, building AKs. But um, let's talk about what kind of got you into that line of work to begin with, because I understand like someone that's a gun fan and then they just decide to start learning how to build guns, but like when you were there, I got to build my AK together. I didn't do all the parts, but I kind of helped, and like I learned real quick how much I hate like sanding and polishing and all the very very tedious stuff that has to happen. Not hate, but I was an action shooter, right? Everything I wanted to do was fast.
Hmm.
But when you get into building platforms and firearms and stuff like that, obviously it's about quality, not quantity. When you're in a company like Rifle Dynamics, so yeah, talk a little bit about how you got into the passion of gunsmithing and manufacturing of firearms.
Okay. So, what got me interested in guns in the first place, obviously, sorry, I got a text message. Is obviously since you're in an urban environment, movies, right? You wanted to, you watched Rambo or you know, Boys in the Hood, right? Menace to Society, right?
You're aging yourself here.
And so, like, our or my background with guns is that they were a cool thing. It wasn't like, hey, I'm gonna learn this and be like a fast competitive shooter or a tactical shooter or something like that. It was just like, oh wow, this thing is cool. It's like, it was strictly like the movies, right? And so I always had a love for guns, and I think when I got my first gun, which was a Mossberg 500 shotgun, and um, I was like 18 years old, and I was working at the mall, um, at a sunglass store. It was like a competitor to Sunglass Hut, and
Okay.
we sold Oakleys there, and they had the really high end Oakleys, and so I met a guy there, and he's like, "You want to trade for a shotgun?" And I was like, So I bought the sunglasses from that place at my employee price and traded that guy for a shotgun. So that was like my very first gun I ever bought, and I still have it. Right, it's a Mossberg Persuader. Um, and then I bought my first gun, a handgun at 21, and I never thought about being in the gun industry and things like that. It was just like something like cool to me to own a gun, right? And I was
Yeah.
a very much a not a casual shooter at that point, right? Because we were young and I was in college, and spending money for a box of ammo could mean a meal for 2 days, right? So I was very much just like a casual shooter, more like a collector. Felt cool having a gun, showing it off, and stuff like that. And then, I got my college degree. I got a religious degree at Evangel University in Springfield, Missouri. And, at the time I was doing a lot of nonprofit work as well. And, working with a bunch of community centers, churches, and things like that. Working with like troubled teens, because obviously I had a little bit of a gray background, right? Where I did naughty things I shouldn't have done in Las Vegas. But hey, it was the 90s, right? Gangs were cool and stuff like that, right?
Right. Right. Exactly.
And so, but once that kind of, I also obviously was still a performer, right? I was a professional breakdancer with a group called Knucklehead Zoo, they were actually 5 times U.S. representatives for like the World Championships. So they were essentially 5-time national champions and represented the United States at the world's biggest, competition at the time called Battle of the Year, and that was in Germany. So I think the highest we ever placed was like fourth in the world. But so I was also working at a magic show in Vegas at the Planet Hollywood. Doing performing on stage, and also doing like assistant pyrotechnics, which basically means I was just taping little fireworks to these fake magical props, right? um, and so that kind of like the show went under, and I really wasn't working at churches anymore. And then a friend of mine, he actually had a Las Vegas shooting forum, right? Because forums are really big before Facebook. This is around 2008. And so one of the sponsors on the forum was Rifle Dynamics. And when people think of Rifle Dynamics, it wasn't the company that it is today back then. Um, and so he was like, "Hey, I just saw that you were recently out of work. You want to basically a job with one of my sponsors?" I'm like, "Well, what is it? What is it?" He's like, "I don't know. Just go and check it out, and I'll just set up an interview." So this was literally like a week after I stopped working, and so I showed up to an interview dressed all nice, and then Jim goes, "All right, let's get to work." I'm like, "Oh, what am I doing?" He's like, "You're demilling parts kits." So basically, I'm grinding off all the sheet metal off foreign made AKs, and they're covered in cosmoline, and I'm dressed all nice, and basically like whacking out rivets and stuff like that. And it's something I've never ever done before, so it was just kind of like something I was interested in trying, because I always liked guns. um, I always felt like I was a handy guy because I've worked on cars before, and by work on
I mean,
cars I
what
mean
Asian
change
hasn't? Let's
parts
be
in my car
honest.
because I was too poor to to hire someone else to do it, right? And so um, and so I demailed my first parts kit, and he's like, "You think this is something you could do?" And I was like, "I think so." And so he basically paid me per parts kit that I did. So I was just it wasn't a real job at that point. It was just hired on piecework, right? So at the time they had this giant wall that had like a bunch of shelves that were like from ground to ceiling almost inside this giant warehouse, and it was full of parts, kits, and orders that need to be demilled. I think there were, I can't remember how many of them there were in there, maybe six or 700 of them, maybe, right? It was just a lot. And so I show up, and you know how my Asian mindset is, where I'm like, okay, well, if he's paying me by piecework, let me set this up like assembly line style, and do as many as I can in this time frame. And so apparently the guy that was doing it before me was doing like one a day, demilling one parts kit a day. So I show up and I line up like five, and I do five, and I was like, okay, that's pretty quick. All right, I'm out of here within 1 or 2 hours. Then the next day I show up and do 10, then 15, and so in a very short amount of time, I was probably making more than anyone at the company, right? Just demilling these parts kits in such a short amount of time. And I think within 2 months, I did all like 700 of them, right? And
Jesus.
and then Jim offered me a job. He's like, "You're pretty squared away, so do you want a job?" And so, I started from the very bottom. At that point, I maybe shot one AK in my life. You know, um,
Mm-hmm.
like a cheapo Wasser 10 that some guy had when we went shooting one time in the desert. But so at this point, I had, even when I was demilling, I wasn't 100% even sure like what all the parts did, because I never, I at that point I probably built an AR, but never really got into AKs, right? Because I'm like, oh, that's an ugly gun or something, right? It wasn't the cool guy gun where you see in movies, right?
It's the cause. Yeah, it's the communist gun. It's the gun all the bad guys always have. It's the one
All the
that
poor guys always had, right, in the
yeah,
movies.
exactly. So
And so,
no U.S. special operators movie showed them using AKs. They were always
right.
using ARs. Yeah.
So again, at that point, only shot an AK once, and so when I started, basically I started from the very bottom. He was like, "Do you want to sandblast these guns after they get test fired?" And so I was a sandblaster, just even blasting the parts. I was like, I have no idea what I'm blasting, for some of the parts, right? I'm like, what is this weird, like, weird shaped thing, right? So,
Mm-hmm.
um, and so yeah, and I was like doing that for probably about like 4 months, and it was just miserable work. Like the sandblasting is, it's, oh man, it's like you stand behind that cabinet and you're like, what am I doing with my life, right? You have a lot of time to think and zone out, and it's very painful on the body, and and you know um and so after a couple months, I was hoping that that I would have other opportunities, and they did come. And so after probably about 4 months, they asked me, hey, do you want to start doing some final assembly on the guns? And I was like, sure. And so once they came out of paint, we oiled them up and final assemble them before a final test fire. And so I was doing final assembly, and they found out really quickly. They just need to show me how to do something one time, and I just remember how to do it. So then it just kind of progressed really quickly from there. Within probably another month and a half, they're like, hey, you want to start building them? So I started building AKs with Jim, and obviously there was mistakes that were made, but for the most part, I picked up really quickly. Um, then they're like, hey, do you want to start painting these guns? I was like, I have a graffiti background, right? I'm urban, I can do it. So I started painting all the guns, right? And then so at the time we were probably only three guys in basically a small garage. That's how small Rifle Dynamics was at the time, and and it started growing quickly. At the time we really catered only to like firearms training guys, because um, I don't know, maybe at the time maybe Jim didn't think big time as far as like being a big known commercial company that it is today. Um, but it was just more like, hey, if you know in the training community that Rifle Dynamics guns, they don't ever fail, stuff like that at the time. And so so they're very much focused on the training community back then. And so I think I started doing things where I started ordering parts and kind of have a little bit more freedom. And so I think once within, I want to say I want to say 3 years, or it might be 2 years, they made me production manager of Rifle Dynamics. And then just I just started saying, hey, let's kind of like see what we can do. Let's really see if we can make the guns look really good as well, as well as their known reliability at that point. So um, I just focused and drove a hard nail, saying these guns really need to look good. We need to drive a new customer base, or we kind of say, hey, this is why we can justify the price that we were charging, because they look phenomenal. And so even if there was like a scratch on the gun, I would just be like, all right, let's refinish it, and
Mm-hmm.
um, and so yeah, it was an interesting time. I started really focusing on building industry relationships with people that are outside the AK community. Working with Silence Co. And we did a run of 300 blackout AKs, and it was just something to do because Silence Co. wanted to try something, and it wasn't. I wasn't there for the production release of those, but I was there for the prototypes that we built, and we probably built one of the first 300 blackout AKs, and mostly again it's just for giggles because it's 7.62 by 39. We really don't what's the point of having 300 blackout minus doing it for a silencer company. But
Right.
I started getting barrels from like Pacnor, where they're known for their crazy accuracy and their relationship with Noveski, and I started working with Aim Point, the guys at Aim Point, and just kind of like elevating our brand, right? And then our company just kind of exploded, and we kind of grew to. I think at the time we grew to 3 buildings, which it was, we grew from, I think it was like 1,500 square foot to maybe 6 to 8,000 square foot. Probably
Mm-hmm.
went to at one point close to 30 employees at one point, I think. And yeah, and yeah, it was kind of a interesting journey, seeing how fast it grew. And then within 2 years after being production manager, I became actually a partner in the company. So I was essentially promoted to co-owner of the company. Um, so yeah, that was kind of like my journey. It was always that I was always really good with my hands. I learned really quickly. I didn't have any machining experience before I started at Rifle Dynamics, but then I realized how much I enjoyed making stuff on machines, and so picked it up really quickly and started developing my own techniques and um, doing these strange, bizarre one-off projects that are a bunch of Frankenstein guns, or putting a triangle side folder on a Saiga 12 shotgun, and I think I was probably one of the first ones to do it in America, actually. Putting triangle side folders on a 308 Saiga, and we were definitely the first ones to do that. Um, but just doing a bunch of random crazy things, right? So I had a signature gun with them where it was an 8-inch barrel Saiga 12 shotgun, that they named it the Cho gun. I didn't, but the name just kind of stuck. Um, and then and then right, oh yeah, we started doing build classes as well. So that was my project with Gene Higdon, formerly of HSGI. We decided to do a build class, and that kind of exploded for RD as well.
Mm-hmm.
So that was my pet project with them. Same thing with the Silence Co. RD collaboration stuff. That was my pet project. Um, and then yeah, it just kind of grew, and then yeah, it just grew so big that I was kind of like, I don't know. I think at that point I started kind of babysitting, and I wanted to try to do new stuff. I think I've kind of maxed out my skills at that point. And then at that point my dad just died as well, and so and my first son was born at the same time. So it just kind of threw my life in a whirlwind where I thought, hey, am I really happy here still? Right? Am I excited to come to work? Am I excited to make stuff? And I know when you get into like a owner or managerial role, you're a lot of times people stop building stuff, and a lot of times it just becomes babysitting and saying, "Hey, why are you late? I'm gonna have to punish you for being late." You gotta be that bad guy, boss kind of thing, which it was not my thing. And
Mm-hmm.
and not only that, I was so much of a perfectionist at that point. I came off as a dick, you know, sometimes to my employees, because I realized that, you know, it was my reputation on the line, and it was Jim's reputation on the line on these guns. And so whenever something wasn't perfect, I would sometimes berate them, torture them, make them exercise or something, you know.
What an Asian martial arts way to punish people.
I realized that
Hold your knuckles out. Whack.
I realized everyone kind of like takes discipline in different levels, right? Like, so one employee would constantly be late, and so for me to affect discipline him where it kind of stuck was to like send him home, basically to make him lose money, where he's like, oh no, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so one other employee, if you tell him to go home, he'd be like, okay, see you later, bye, right? And so for him, I was like, this guy, I'm gonna have to torture him by making him exercise, right? Because he hated exercising. So I'm like, all right, drop and give me 100, right? Stuff like that, right? Go run around the building a few times, or else, you know, I'm gonna murder you, right? But so every employee kind of like, you know, took discipline in a different way. But I was very much a lot tougher than them back then than I should have probably been, just because, you know, I was young, and you know, I was obsessed, right? And I was one of those crazy, sometimes, I don't want to compare it to like Steve Jobs, but very much that attitude where saying, hey, you know, this needs to be perfect. Why can't it be perfect, kind of thing, you know?
Yeah.
And so,
well, it's very difficult to hand over control of something, especially when you were the one that either developed it or perfected it and stuff like that, and then you hand it over to someone. Then as soon as you see them start to do something differently, you're like, no, you know what, you're ruining it. Give it back to me.
well, no,
Instead of just being like, okay, well, let's see.
no, I'm always encouraging someone to do it better than me, right? I'm always like, if you can find a way to do it faster or better, do it. But if you do it slower than me, I'm like, why can't you be at least as good as me? So
now,
that was my and we cycled through a lot of employees, and it wasn't me firing them, and it was always a team. So it was never like, I'm like, I don't like that guy, let's fire them. You know, it's always like the team of management will say, hey, let's go. We don't like this guy because he's not pulling his weight. Let's get rid of him. Billy, you tell him to come into the office. So it makes it look like I'm the bad guy, but it was never a solo decision by me. So, you know, but if you're good, I want you to stick around, right? And so, but at that point, my dad has died. Realized I wasn't really happy where I was. You know, it's mostly babysitting, getting into arguments with investors, and so I got into one final argument with the office secretary with one of the investors, and I was like, all right, I'm done. And they're like, what do you mean you're done? I was like, I'm leaving. They're like, what do you mean you're leaving? I'm leaving the company. And they're like, well, what are you going to do? I had no backup plan. But because my life was so crazy, I just had my first kid. My dad just died a month after my kid was born. And when I was cleaning out his apartment, my dad's apartment, I was like, there's so much trash here. Was my dad really happy? I don't know. So I was like, I just want to be happy. I want my kids to be happy. And this place probably isn't it for me. So I just said, okay, I'm not gonna do you dirty. I basically said, you know, I'm gonna leave. I don't know when. You find whoever you want. I'll train whoever you want, and then I'm gonna find something else. And so, yeah, and that's what happened. And so I left Rifle Dynamics probably maybe 3 months after that conversation with them. And you know, it wasn't an easy thing to do. It was bittersweet, right? You know, at that point, you know, me and Jim still have a good relationship today, you know, but we've kind of built this relationship where we're basically the Cheech and Chong of the AK industry. And he's Cheech, I'm probably Chong, right? Just because.
Yeah. No. Well, you know, it was funny because prior to the work that I got to do with Rifle Dynamics, where I would come in and do test firing for you guys, you know, the the general consensus among the firearm community was that AKs were not necessarily, yeah, sure, they were reliable, but you can't hit a broadside of a barn with them, especially once it starts going out of distance. And one of the things you guys were able to prove to the firearms world was, yeah, you can. You just suck at doing it. Like, it's not the gear, it's the shooter. It's not the arrow, it's the Indian kind of thing, right? And now, like, I feel the AK world has blown up recently, and it's funny because you almost see it like, I know there's AK matches that are out there, but they're not really matches, because when I consider something a match, top level guys are going and everyone's competing and we're trying to figure out who the best is. When you go to an AK match, though, and I'm going to use match in quotations fingers here, it's more about the community, and no one really gives a shit about the results except for the top level shooters that go there to shoot the match. And maybe, you know, there's guns on the prize table or something like that. So for us, we want to go and get something out of our investment, which is to try and win the guns and whatnot. But you go to an AK match, and it's probably some of the most fun you're ever going to have, because you're squatted with these people that are, you know, wearing tracksuits and gold chains and Russian kits and, you know, dressed like Russian soldiers or whatever. They're more about they're having fun. They're shooting their rifle in a condition where they probably never have before, with having to engage targets and shoot on the move, and maybe even have to do mandatory reloads on the clock and stuff. So it's way more of a fun experience than it is a stressful competition. It's definitely much more about the experience than it is about the competition when you go to some of these AK shoots and AK events. And so that was something that was pretty cool to be able to watch that shift of AKs aren't a serious fighting rifle, and they shouldn't be meant for anything other than, you know, buying the $300 cheap SKS from Big Five Sporting Goods and then just going out because you can't afford a real rifle. Now it's like you can do a lot of cool shit with an AK now. So it's been cool to watch that grow.
I mean,
now you talked about.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was gonna say, so you talked about how much you enjoyed making your own parts, doing machining, and all that kind of stuff. And now you branched from, well, not now, you've been doing it for a while, but you branched from manufacturing firearms into becoming a knife maker. And what I'd like to ask you about that is, I mean, how did that start? Because I feel like, you know, once you're a fireman, or once you're a firearms guy, like, that's what your world revolves around on. And knives are cool, and I've started to appreciate knives a whole lot more than now that I've bought a few that are nicer, higher end, and stuff like that. So I can have a new appreciation for it. But to go from making firearms to all of a sudden being like, I want to learn more about metal. I want to learn more about forging. I want to learn more, like, how did that transpire? Because it's not like it's, I mean, there's I guess there's steps you can take to get into becoming a knife maker. Am I correct?
Yeah, for sure. You know, it's funny because when I left Rifle Dynamics, I wanted to basically learn more skills. Right when I left, I had a bunch of investors come and say, hey, I'll give you $10 million to start an AK shop. And I was like, no, I'm burnt out. I want to learn more about the other side, like manufacturing. So I actually became a director at Radiant Weapons for about 3 years because I wanted to learn more about CNC machining, and I felt like they were probably doing it the best in America, right? Them and you know, John Sharps was making incredible lowers as well, very intricate detail stuff, and it was something that I didn't know how to do. And at that point, I started collecting knives before I started making them, and it's funny how that came about. Was, you know, the gun industry is very ignorant about the custom knife world, and it's pretty funny because if you post a knife and say, hey, this was $1,000 knife, and then the gun industry would just kind of just come after you like, what kind of an idiot are you? You don't need $1,000 knife. You know, I have my box cutter and my $15, you know, Gerber that I got from Walmart or a thrift store. This is all you need, and they're 100% true, right? But what I quickly realized was that custom knives were also considered art and a very hot commodity. And because they were very limited, especially with really popular knife makers, that they had a strong secondary value on them. For example, if you were to buy a knife for $600, you could, from a famous maker, directly from them, you can often flip it for over $3,000. So, so people in the gun industry have no idea because, you know, I hate to say it, but a lot of times the gun industry caters to people that are always looking for sales and deals and waiting for a Labor Day sale or a Black Friday sale to buy their gun parts and ammo, right? And that's very much the opposite in the knife world. The knife world, it's the people are very much like the AK world where they're super friendly, super respectful, and you know, they like collecting knives from essentially who they consider artists. And so when someone is buying a $50,000 knife and people call them stupid, they don't realize they could probably sell that knife for 200,000, like in an instant, right? And so there is so when I started off as a collector, I was just buying and selling knives, keeping the ones I wanted to keep, flipping the ones I wanted to flip, and it was like an additional $30,000 a year in my pocket just by buying and selling, not doing anything, just kind of saying, "Hey, I have this brand new knife from this maker. Do you want it? This is the price." Very similar to the watch industry, right? Because, like for example, Rolexes, the market's kind of tanked a little bit, but at one point you could buy a Rolex for, you know, 9,000 and sell it for 30,000. Right, and so the knife world is very much the same. So I kind of didn't want to reveal the secret because I don't want a bunch of crazy gun people coming into our world. I'm just kidding. No, but yeah, it's very much that 100%. There's obviously people that just enjoy collecting knives, but there is a lot of money in there because nobody really needs a really expensive knife besides people that are on the 1%. And so you'll have auctions, and I mean it's crazy, you know, just the amount of money you'll see, you know, live auctions where you'll see a guy that's a farmer, right? He's just wearing, like, it's funny, he'll wear like a $20,000 watch, but like, you know, $10 overalls and dirty boots, and he's bidding on a knife that he wants against a guy that's bidding for a sultan somewhere. And
Yeah.
the guy's wearing a suit on a phone calling this guy, or a celebrity. But that's very much the knife world. It's very like diverse and mixed between all the customer bases. But there's a lot of money involved in that. And so obviously if you make a knife that's not popular, no one's going to buy it. But if you have a very desirable model, there is a ton of money on top of that. So people don't realize that. Like, oh, you don't need if you're buying a $600 knife, you're an idiot. Oh no, you just don't know, right? It's just like same thing, I guess, with the handbag market, which I don't know, you know, which, you know, women are or some men are obsessed with, right? Where some bags will be like, you know, $1,000, but you can flip them because they're so limited. That's very much the knife world. So I started off as a collector, and then, you know, going to these knife shows, and the knife shows are completely different than gun shows. For example, the knife show, if you see a maker there and he has knives on his table, you can't be like, "Hey, can I come buy that knife that's on your table?" He'll say no. He's like, "What?" Well, you're saying, "Well, there's a price tag on there, and it's still there. Why can't I buy it?" He's like, "Oh, you have to enter a lottery for a chance to buy one. It's not a lottery for a free knife. It's just a lottery for a chance to buy one, because they're so limited, and because you can flip them instantly. Like, I've seen at shows where someone will buy a knife for $1,500 and sell it to the guy behind them for like $4,000 or $5,000, like in an instantly. So there's a lot of money and things like that changing hands inside these knife shows. But most of these knife shows, that's not like a swap meet, right? If you go to a gun show, people are selling beef jerky. You know, the knife booth over there. They have like a bucket of swords where it's like $5 per sword, right? And it's like one of those QVC style ones where you bang it on a table, break, and hit you in the stomach, right?
Yeah.
The knife shows are not like that at all. So there's very famous knife shows like the California Custom Knife Show, the USN Gathering in Vegas. There's the New York City Knife Show, the Nashville Knife Show, Arts and Metals, Blade Show, Texas. There's like a big knife show like this every month, somewhere in the world or somewhere in the country. and us knife makers will just kind of migrate to these shows, but you can't go there and just buy a knife from a knife maker. Oftentimes you have to enter a lottery for a chance to buy one, which is this is why you have people like camp outside, and it's crazy. And so going back, I went to a knife show called the USN Gathering in Vegas, and I met a knife maker named Sean Kendrick, and um, I opened up one of his folding knives, and I was like, oh my gosh, the feeling is completely different if you've never handled a custom folding knife compared to a production one. The feeling is completely different. It just felt, I've never felt like anything in my life at that point, like how it felt when it opened in my hand. And I was like, dude, can you teach me? And he's like, yeah, sure. It was crazy, and nowadays, Sean is his knives sell for 5 figures, right? But at the time he wasn't that big at the time, and so and the funny thing is he was essentially like the complete opposite of me. He was very much into like very much into like a death metal. He had like a beard like a wizard, right? And I was very much the hip hop guy, but I was just asking him to teach me basically purely on how his knives felt and looked and functioned. So he's like, yeah, sure. So he invited me over to his house in Aberdeen, Ohio. This very small town, no cell phone service, right? And so I spent 4 days with this guy making knives, and yeah, it was kind of like, at that point I was just a AK builder, right? A gun builder, because even though I'm known for my AKs, I've kind of built a little bit of everything, right? Worked on sub guns and bolt guns and all that, but I was predominantly known for my AKs. But at the time I was just an AK builder and a collector, and so I've made stuff, right? And when I first finished that first knife, that feeling I got was like, holy crap, I designed this from scratch, and then I made it into like the world's oldest tool, like a functioning knife. And the feeling is like, I don't know, it's really hard to describe. It's like, I always call it creative satisfaction, because you're like, you want to kind of like jump up and down. You're so excited, right? Because everything kind of works and you made it. And so I always say this as an analogy. Like, people are like, what do you like better, knives or guns? I'm like, I always love guns, right? And even if I won the lottery and was a billionaire, I would still make guns, because that's how much I love them. And the same applies for knives. But with guns, they have to be built a certain way to be a gun, right? There's like you have to have a place to put a bullet, right? there's gotta be a barrel, contrary to some of these modifications you see on people's guns. There's gotta be a barrel, right? There's gotta be a way to hit that primer, and hopefully the pressure will bring that bolt back somehow, whether it's gas pressure or gas blowback or whatever, right? And so if you don't do that, it kind of ceases to be a gun. But when it comes to knife making, if you can basically make whatever you want. You can make a giant I always say you can make a giant cock and balls out of metal, and you still feel that creative satisfaction, because you're like, I've designed this and I've made this. Sorry, children.
I'm just trying to picture what that knife would look like. And
I mean, you can make literally whatever you want, and you're like, wow, I've made this. And that's the biggest difference between making a knife and a gun. And also, a lot of people don't know is that when you're a gun builder in America, you're technically not allowed to give any information about how to build these guns or anything about guns to people that live outside the America, right? And so there's a lot of ITAR rules, and I can't just sell a gun to a guy in China, South. Right? I can't just, anywhere outside of America, right? Even Canada, right? Without special paperwork and all that, right? With a knife, I can sell a knife to anyone in the whole world, no problem, right? Obviously, you have to do based off their laws. Like for example, Korea can't have a folding knife that's the blade's longer than 2.5 inches. So obviously, it has to follow under those guidelines. But I've sold knives to people in Dubai, the Netherlands, Thailand, Japan, Korea, Russia, right? It's just all over the place. It's kind of crazy thinking that my knives are all over the world. It's crazy. I've seen a guy, I made a knife for a guy in the Netherlands. He's had it for a few years and sold it to some guy that basically years later that lives probably about 5 minutes away from me now. So it's kind of made like this whole round trip back to Oregon where I live, and it's kind of crazy. And so so you have a lot more financial freedom to sell to whoever you want when you're a knife maker as well. But that's the biggest thing, is that they're a commodity, but obviously you have to make a desirable product. So just because you have a name in the gun industry, just because you may be a decorated hero, right? Your knives might not sell, right? Because you have to have a desirable product. A great example about this would be, let's look at the Magpul knife that came out, right? You guys remember that when the Magpul knife came out a couple of years ago?
Yeah, yeah.
And so no one in the knife industry wanted that knife. So as far as collectors wise, and the funny thing, a lot of us, I wouldn't say not a lot of us, but a lot of people, I wouldn't say a lot of us, I don't want to put me under that, was making fun of the way it looked, right? Because it kind of looked like a copy of a knife that was made by a designer that we all made fun of, right? And so no one in the knife collecting world wanted that Magpul knife. I don't know a single person that has one. But I mean, the gun industry kind of like went crazy over it. I don't understand, but obviously, I think that knife's probably a little bit collectible. I think it sells for a little bit more than what the retail is, and people that were in the gun industry was giving people who bought those knives crap because they were like, "Oh, that knife's too expensive. Why would you even buy that?" And then people were flipping them, and then they're like, "Oh, these guys are horrible." I'm like, "No, that's a normal thing in the knife industry, right?" And it's so funny, but yeah, that's very much it. Like, I'm very fortunate enough to be able to make knives and make a living off it because it's very difficult. I fortunately built up a lot of skills in knife making by building AKs, actually, right? Learning how to machine, grinding off rivets. I didn't realize I was learning how to hollow grind a knife all those years, just grinding off a grinding wheel and grinding rivets off. So I picked up knife making very quickly. It's almost been 10 years now since I've been making knives, which is crazy to think. It's gonna be 10 years in January, and yeah, my knives have always sold out. I'm 7-year backlogged on my knives, and my knives start around $1,000, and it's the fact that people still want them, and I get hit up all the time. Once I post the knife, people just want to buy it. I just feel really fortunate, that that's the case, because there's a ton of knife makers that don't make it, right? And so I just feel really, really lucky to be able to do what I like. And again, with the same thing with guns, I would still make knives every day, and until the day I can't. So if I could be 80 years old or 90 years old making knives, I'm still gonna do it, right? So just because I feel like it's like a legacy as well. Knives will pretty much last, hopefully, forever, right? We still find arrowheads and things like that are hundreds of years old, right? So hopefully, when I'm long gone, that somebody will still be using my knives and collecting my knives, trying to collect all the ones that are out there and stuff like that. And so, but I overall still just enjoy it, even though it's really hard on the body, right? People don't think, oh, it's so easy to make, right? It's not. It's very much hard on your body. A lot of looking down a lot. That's why a lot of knife makers have like a hunchback eventually, because they're looking down a lot. A lot
Now,
of
how
Yeah.
How extensive is your knife making studio? Like, are you buying materials and then just machining them, or are you actually forging your own materials? Like, what how extensive is your studio?
Right. So typically in the knife world, there's several different styles, but the two biggest categories or the split down the line is what they consider forging or stock removal. Forging is obviously what you see on a TV show, right? Where basically they'll take raw metals and they'll hammer it out, and then they'll you know shape the knife with hot metals, right, with a hammer or power hammer or a hydraulic press and things like that. And then stock removal is what I do. Basically, buying sheets of known steel, right? So something that's a very common steel would be like D2 for carbon steel, 3V, and a common stainless would be like CPM 154 or S35V, those kind of things. So I'm personally not into forging myself, right? Which it's because I don't think it suits my style, and I can't justify the cost of forging and taking 4 or 5 days to forge a Damascus billet and then turning that into a knife or a folding knife and justifying the price where I would price myself out of the market, right? Because you're like saying this took me a week's worth of work and it's not even a knife yet, and then you guys spend another month. So I'm like, okay, so this is gonna be a $25,000 knife, and so you gotta kind of like weigh the cost. Even like people that are master smiths in forging, sometimes they don't get that kind of money at all, right? And they'll spend a very long time working on a knife. So my influences have always been like sci-fi and fantasy, right? I was very much a kid that grew up watching Dragon Ball Z and watching Power Rangers and Chinese kung fu movies, right? And all those things are basically the cool thing about being a knife maker is you can kind of use that to influence your style and your blade design and your handle design and things like that, right? And so I don't think for me forging doesn't fit that style for me. So for if I ever wanted to make, I use Damascus quite a bit. If you guys see my pictures on my knives, I use Damascus quite a bit, and I buy that usually typically from friends of mine, right? That forge it. Chad Nichols is a really big one in our community, and he forges all kinds of crazy Damascus. So people don't realize that you can just buy Damascus billets from guys that make Damascus, right? So it's just like Chad doesn't really make knives; he just sells his Damascus. It's kind of crazy, but he's kind of got it down to a science where I know a lot of famous gun guys that are using Damascus on their guns. You can probably figure out who they are. Have come to him about how to make billets to make gun parts, 1911 parts or whatever, right? And so, but going back to that forging versus stock removal, I feel like stock removal fits my style better. So what I do is I mostly make tactical folding knives. And in fact, I'm actually the only Korean American tactical folder maker. Or I would say a semi-successful one. I'm sure there's a lot of people trying now because there's a million knife makers out there. So I buy raw titanium to make used for handles, but I also buy like exotic materials like zirconium. Right? People don't realize that zirconium is what they put in explosive rounds, like Ralphus rounds, right? Where you see the armor piercing explosive, because powdered zirconium is very explosive, right? So if I grind down zirconium, right, and light that dust on fire, it's like a firework. It's like a big flash, right? But the cool thing about zirconium is people like it because it's like 100% corrosion resistant. So people use it for knife handles. But if you like basically sand it down into basically like, so it just looks like a piece of metal, right? Just a nice sanded piece of metal. If you get that zirconium red hot and let it cool down, it develops like this crazy black oxide on the outside that's like super tough and super cool looking. So, um, so knife makers use zirconium, which typically used by military to make explosive rounds, to make black handles, right? uh, but then it's also like the crazy thing is what's popular with knives, right? So even like um, there's a thing called micarta, right? A lot of people know micarta as similar to like Bakelite, right? Because Bakelite, everyone knows about Bakelite AK magazines. It's like essentially the Russians' version of plastic, right? So micarta was kind of similar, where in the I would say the 50s era, there was like a micarta making company factories all over America where they would press sheets of resin and either paper or cloth or bags or rags, right? And they would basically layer a piece of micarta or a bunch of micarta, like sometimes it's like shredded fabric, and then a layer of epoxy, micarta, epoxy, and then they'll press it and basically makes like the like an early version of plastic back then, right? And so they use this material for anything from countertops to you know electrical like protective stuff, right? So all that stuff has become incredibly valuable in the knife world. So people use that to make knife handles, and a lot of it is vintage. So sometimes a piece of micarta that's like like this big might be like $1,500 just for the raw part. People use mother of pearl, right? People use gems. People use gold, right? It's people use mammoth tusk. It's just like a whole crazy range. There's people that just sell knife making material. It's kind of crazy, and they've been around for some of them almost 100 years. So
and micarta, that stuff kind of ends up having that look that like G10 grips or VZ grips kind of look, right? Where it's like that layered look of like it's black and then gray and then black and gray and that's where you can get a lot of those.
So G10 is essentially like the predecessor. Is that the predecessor? Oh, to micarta, right? So it.
Oh, no, it's like the.
What's the word?
The cheap child. I don't know. The cheaper child.
But it came out.
So micarta is like the specialized version, whereas like the G10 stuff is more like the cheaper, easier to produce without.
What I think because micarta came out. I mean, G10 came out after micarta because micarta is old technology, right? There's only specialized people that are kind of making it now, whereas back then it used to be on everything. Like it was inside refrigerators to, cups to trays to anything you can imagine that was had plastic on it was usually micarta, right? Toys, bowling balls, anything you can imagine. So now people are finding these old pieces of micarta and then chopping them up and putting it inside knife handles. But G10 came out after because I think maybe it was cheaper, but I think G10 overall is probably stronger, less prone to flexing. So I think the G10 is a improved version of micarta, but people still want the micarta because of the history and the rarity of it. So, for example, like a micarta is horrible on like steak knives or kitchen knives because if you leave it inside a dirty knife inside of a sink, right? And if it had micarta handles, micarta can technically absorb all that bacteria because technically it's a lot of times it's made out of cloth or some kind of fabric, so it just absorbs, kind of like wooden steak knives. You don't see those anymore, right? Wooden handle. Whereas G10 wouldn't do that. So but people still prefer the micarta. They like the way it feels, they like the way it looks, they like the way it smells. It's kind of crazy. But yeah, I mean, the people use all kinds of materials. I mean, they even use MRI machines, right? They have those giant cables, right? And inside those cables are essentially superconductor style material, which is basically coils of copper with pieces of niobium on the inside that make a crazy pattern, right? So it'll be like if you ever take one of those MRI cables, don't do this if you work at a hospital, right? Don't be a crackhead and steal MRI cables, right? First off, it's probably way too heavy for you to carry it out. But inside these cables that are really thick, and if you were to take a slice out of it, it would be like a copper outside housing with like crazy, like a darker pattern of what they consider it's a metal called niobium, right? And they use it and they consider a superconductor because it is needed for, I guess, drawing power. But people would take that slice and make that into a knife handle. It's kind of crazy. And so people have used carbon fiber from the SpaceX rockets. They've used, it's like, I mean, a meteorite. We use meteorite all the time for knives, and meteorite's crazy expensive. And I always say all the time, like, you know, this piece of meteorite traveled over space and time, millions of years, just for an idiot like me to make a knife out of, right? So, so it's a lot of fun because you get to kind of experiment with really cool materials and stuff that you've never used before. Very ancient materials, World War II stuff, and so you kind of feel like you have a part of the history because when you sand it, all that stuff has a weird, funky smell to it. You know, when you're basically sanding old World War II micarta, you're like, oh, this smells like death, right? But it kind of like it has every knife that you make has its own character, right? And so
yeah,
but it's a very fun industry, very respectful. Like I said earlier, I run 4 businesses now, and one of those businesses is actually I run a knife show. So I started hosting my own knife show last year, and it's called the Pacific Northwest Custom Invitational. So we purposely made it long as kind of a joke name, but what I do is kind of invite the top makers all over the world to come and showcase their knife in Oregon and sell it however way they want, you know, and some of these guys are absolute legends that show up. And so so we just had our last show in July at Seaside, Oregon, at the Seaside Convention Center, and it was probably roughly around the, you know, including the space that we rented, the foyer area as well. It was probably around 20,000 square foot facility that we used, and at the end of the show, there wasn't a single piece of trash on the floor, right? Not a single wrapper, not a single business card, not a single sticker. And everyone had stickers, right? So that just shows the difference between the knife community and gun community. They're a lot more respectful. You know, if they drop something, they'll pick it up. But the fact that 20,000 square foot didn't have a single piece of trash on the floor is pretty amazing. So, I
don't know if I can make that happen, even if I was trying.
Me either. I was like, there's trash on my floor at home. What's going on?
Like, oh yeah, something is gonna drop out of my pocket. I'm not gonna see it, and I'm gonna be that asshole that left a piece of trash from a Hall's cough drop that was in my back pocket. And I didn't know it was in there.
But it just shows that if someone sees someone else's trash, they'll pick it up, you know. And so, but it was a very cool event. But it was, it was kind of eye-opener because I've been in the gun industry for a long time now, and you know, I've been very fortunate in that industry as well. And it's funny, I don't advertise at all, right? So some people have actually forgotten about me because of a lot of these other companies that come up and have huge budgets on advertising. And I've had people ask me to have guns on YouTube videos or magazine ads. I'm like, no, I'm good, right? Because I think I put in the work early on where people knew who I was, and I've always been slammed busy as far as never not had work, AK work. And so, you know, I'm roughly a year backlog on AK stuff, and I'm trying to crank them out as fast as possible. But been very fortunate and been in the gun industry for a very long time and been to many gun conventions, right? Many colds and sicknesses you get from that place, right?
Yes.
The SHOT
Lord
Show
knows how many times we caught the disease that shall not be named, without knowing that we caught the disease that shall not be named. I'm fairly certain I caught it the first SHOT Show before it actually got released for it, because I felt like garbage for a 24-hour period right after a SHOT Show event. But
but all that being said, like, I've never experienced like the community that I find in the knife world. Very respectful, very kind, super excited, as opposed to just being like, "Ugh, can this be over with?" Right? Or people showing up trying to rip off other people's designs, right, and turn them into airsoft guns or whatever. Not saying that doesn't happen in the knife community. Obviously, there's always some kind of bootlegging happening with every kind of product that's popular, but it's so different with the knife community for sure. Just people are very kind, helpful. Um, it's kind of like you build like a family. It's very much in between. If you think the AK community was cool, the knife community is even cooler than that, right? It's like a step lower where they're like, it's amazing. Like I can't. There's no other way to describe it as far as like these people will have your back, right? So, 2 days ago, a friend of ours in the knife community, his wife died from cancer. Right, she was 43 years old, and this guy makes brass knuckles. He doesn't even make knives, but he's been very much part of our industry where it becomes a part of the knife world where you can make these little EDC trinkets, right? So this guy makes custom brass knuckles, and the knife industry probably raised, man, a significant amount for his family, and out of nowhere, not even with him asking, they just do it, and so. I mean, the way that these people just kind of step up and are so selfless and kind, always basically makes me like, oh yeah, I would never leave this kind of industry because, I've built lifelong friends in there, right? There's been many times in the gun industry where people just call you or message you because they want something, and not saying that that doesn't happen in the knife world, but you kind of develop these lifelong relationships inside this knife world that you can't really find anywhere else. It's kind of crazy where I know that as long as I make a knife, I know that people will buy them no matter what, right? If I made 1,000 of them, they'd buy 1,000 of them. And so it's been amazing. And but obviously I still love guns because, how can you not, right? So.
Well, because you can only throw a knife so fast. It's better. It is good to be able to have the ability to throw another hunk of metal a couple hundred yards with some accuracy.
So this is the weird thing too. People that often buy my crazy high-end knives, they never cut anything with it.
Yeah,
they just want something to go with, like their nice watch, their nice suit. And they'll have two knives. One that they'll throw at someone, maybe. One they'll use to cut boxes or, cut their fingernails. And then one they just like holding and opening and closing. And so that's also the strange thing that guys don't, and the knife or the gun world don't understand. They're like, they'll come up to me and say, hey, I want a knife where I can use it to like baton, wood in the forest while making fires and stuff like that. I'm like, well, you probably shouldn't use a folder for that. I was like, you should probably get a fixed blade. Yeah, like, what are you doing? Like, there's essentially a hinge where, a lot of knives will survive. Mine will survive it, but it will basically make everything come loose because it's not made to be beat on like that, right?
Yep.
And so, anyone that's a true outdoorsman would probably use a fixed blade for that, right? No matter what some YouTube influencer says, right?
Well, no, some of them can be very, very convincing, and some of their fans are so diehard that they'll go to the grave defending whatever it is that they said. But
so people in the knife world would be like, I want something that's super tough that I want to like use to like baton wood, and I'm like, well, get a fixed blade, right?
Or a hatchet.
Yeah.
There's literally tools that are meant specifically for that you don't have to carry around in your pocket.
Right. I'm like, you have to find the right tool for the job. And this is, I don't know what you're asking me to make. Like a $3,000, $4,000, $5,000, $6,000, $7,000, $8,000, $9,000 knife is not for that. Right. Yeah. It's like, you could use it for that, but then it's just like, what are you doing? You know what I mean? It's like, I don't know. It's like saying I'm gonna buy a Ferrari and just take the door and turn it into a skateboard or something like that. It's just like so random where, that's not the job for that. You know what I mean? It's
Well,
kind
so
of
it sounds more because by the way you've described it, it sounds like the knife community is definitely more centered around the art and the mastery of the skill than it
yeah,
is about the application of the tool. Not to say that you can't use the tool for what it's meant for, but it seems like it's definitely more of a collector, artistic side of it. So a good comparison, I would say, would probably be like it'd be like buying a Picasso and then going at it with a crayon and adding an addition to the actual painting of your own. Like, congratulations, you just took something that was really valuable, beat the hell out of that, and now you devalued it because it's
right.
no longer what it was. Part of the art was the craftsmanship that went into the fit and finish and the how the lines clean up and all that stuff, and then you just completely destroyed it because now you've got hammer marks and all this
Yeah,
kind of stuff. Like, it's
yeah.
not like you stabbed Hitler with it and now it's more valuable, but
Right.
rather
But
you stabbed a piece of oak.
that's not saying that all the knife world's like that. But this is specifically talking about the custom knife world, right?
Right.
So, obviously, there's several production companies. There's also even like a mid-grade production company they call like mid-techs, where they'll create a higher end production company than or higher end knife than the several production companies that you can kind of imagine. So it kind of bridges the gap between custom and production company. They kind of consider mid-techs. So we're specifically talking about highly collectible makers that are in this knife industry. So, um, when we're talking about production knives, oh yeah, that's what I carry all the time. That's what I would use the baton wood because I'm like, this is only like $100 or whatever, right? And I
Hmm.
guess to some people that is still a lot of money for a knife, $100, right? And so, but for me, I'm like, okay, well, I'd rather use that and send it into some factory to get it warranted, right? Because some people, a lot of those companies will have like a forever warranty. Well, they'll just send you a brand new one, right? Because it
Hmm.
doesn't cost them anything really to make. Um, so I'd rather use that for heavy duty use and then just have something nicer to wear. People who have like luxury watches and things like that, they kind of understand that, right? Some people use that and they use it for hardcore work, right? Some people will, Navy SEALs are known to wear Rolex Submariners, right? Um, but you wouldn't see them with like the what they consider a higher end Rolex, right? Like there's a one called the Rainbow Daytona that goes for hundreds of $1,000s. They're not doing that or going on missions, right? They're not. That has like a rainbow diamond all over the watch, right? It's made out of gold. They're not going to use that for spec ops, right? So it's kind of the same thing. So there are work knives out there. If you're going to use it to go camping and batoning on, first off, get a fixed blade. Second off, or if you wanted a folder, then use like a cheaper production knife. Don't use a custom for that because it's kind of like defeats the purpose of it, right?
Hmm.
But all of it will cut. I know some guys that just use my knife to cut meat. They just use it to cut steaks, cut their cigars, right? It's kind of weird. But knives early on were like the original fidget spinners. Remember when fidget spinners were kind of big for a few years?
Oh yeah.
Way before then, knife maker or knife.
I never bought one because I refused to be one of those weenies. But yes, I remember when they were very popular.
But knife collectors were that way before that came out because they would open their and close their knives like a million times in a day. Like they'll be talking on the phone and opening and closing a knife the whole time. So for knife collectors, knives were essentially the first fidget spinners kind of thing.
Well, and I agree with that. Even to this day, I'll still, if I've got a knife in my hand, I'll sit there and pop the blade open and close it and open and close it and like feel the click of when it secures in place and all that kind of
Yeah,
stuff. And um, it's funny. I as I got older, I always talk about the fact that, like, first of all, when you're younger, like, you can get completely and utterly obliterated off of whatever kind of alcohol you can find, fall asleep on the bathroom floor hugging the toilet, and wake up the next morning feeling pretty refreshed and ready to go for round two. And now I sleep on a mattress that I spent over $1,500 on, and my feet hurt when I stand up Like, I don't understand how I can not, be like everything about me is sore when I get out of a nice cushioned bed. Um, but as you get older, you start to appreciate some of the finer things that are required. And when you're young, the one example I say is like I used to buy my socks from Walmart because you can buy like 24 for like $12, and it's awesome, and you just wear it. And then you buy a new pair that are really nice, really cushiony. They're built good quality and all that kind of stuff. And then when you try and go buy Walmart socks again, you're like, oh my god, what is this? Like, it's like single ply toilet paper compared to the stuff I was using before. And I kind of learned that I feel like as you get older, there's a couple things I feel like every man should at least buy. I think you need to buy a nice suit. You have to, at one time in your life, buy yourself a nice suit, the way it makes you feel and going through the whole process. It's a cool experience to have. I think having a nice watch, and it doesn't have to be like, to me, with my budget, right? Like, I'm not talking about going out and buying a Rolex, but if it's a watch that when you look at the price tag, a little part of you goes like, oh, I don't know if I could afford that. Like, that's good. That's kind of where your budget is. Mm-hmm. But when you do something, when you do something that you're very proud of in your life, whether or not it's professional or personal, go ahead and reward yourself with something like that, where you're like, oh god, it'll be tough, but I'm going to make it happen, because you have a nice watch. Every time you look at the watch, you don't necessarily see the price tag. You're going to see what you accomplished in order to justify the purchase, right? Mm-hmm. You're not just buying a watch to spend $200, $300, $400 on, but rather you're buying it because you're like, I worked my ass off for the whole year. I paid off my credit card debt. I finished my school loans, or I finally hit, $100,000 or whatever. Like, that's that reminder to you, like, of what my accomplishment was, not, hey, look at my $600 watch or $1,000 watch. Yeah. I also think that a nice pen is underrated.
Yeah.
Like, to have a nice pen that is just always going to work, and when you write on it, it's going to work, and it's going to be smooth. There's not going to be like that halfway through your signature, a big old glob of ink just pops out, and now your signature looks like, someone threw up on you or something like that. Yeah. And then a nice knife. And that was something that was a recent thing where a couple years ago I was at NRA show, I think, and some buddies of mine introduced me to some people over at Microtech, and so I got my first Microtech knife, and like you said, it was like one of those things, as soon as I opened it up in my hand, I was like, whoa, that was different, and closed it and opened it and was like, that's different. I've never had a knife that made me stop and think about the mechanics that go inside it and how it feels when it popped open, and the sound of it, and even the quality of it. So since then I now own 2 Microtechs, and one of them, like you said, I bought my first one to kind of like have as like I used it for a lot of stuff. I probably used it more than I should have. But then I got another one that was the Bounty Hunter, and that was just because I love Boba Fett. I mean, I've got his bobblehead right here. So they made a knife called the Bounty Hunter that has the color scheme and the logo and all that kind of stuff of Boba Fett, and I just really like that knife. And I did use that one too. That was kind of out of necessity. I took a knife with me hunting, got my deer, and then when I tried to gut it, the knife wasn't cutting through the hide at all, so I had to use my Microtech to gut this deer out in the field. But it did a great job of it. It did an excellent job of gutting the deer, and I got some awesome photos of it, like all covered in blood, like in the gut pile and stuff too. So I at least did that. But no, I agree. I think to have you don't appreciate something like a nice knife until you buy one, and get to experience that as an owner and whatnot. I mean, it's almost like the same as, like, you can own 20 Glocks if you want, but something about the first time you buy a custom build or something like that from someone like Joe Chambers or Matt McLaren or something like that, like the first time you rack a slide on a gun like that, and you're like, whoa, what the hell? Like, this feels like glass on glass with KY jelly between it. Like, that's impressive to get metal to feel that way, right? Yeah. And I'm gonna assume that's kind of the experience you had the first time you opened up a custom knife, where it was like, oh, like, it's not supposed to feel like that. Yeah. And yet somehow you made it happen.
It felt like it was alive. It felt like, I don't know, it was kind of really hard to describe, and I kind of chase after that for every knife that I make, where people, when they open it, right, and it just flies out and it feels like it has like a life of its own. And you're like, whoa, and when you get that response, I'm like, that's what got me into making knives, you know. And so, and it's funny because if I ever released any kind of recordings of me in the shop, and whenever I get that feeling, I'm in the shop yelling like, "Yes, I did it!" Right? Still to this day, I was like, it would just be so embarrassing, and so like, I still chase after that feeling like every knife I make, and yeah, it's very much so that where it's like you're like you notice a difference in quality for sure, right? And so, um, obviously, I had a very crazy life, so I've had a bunch of different hobbies and a bunch of things I liked, right? I was really into cars and um, motorcycles and knives, obviously, and watches, and you know, obviously, when you get older, to your taste in collecting changes as well. And so, but I absolutely agree that you should have um, not only what you're saying, reward yourself, right? To um, if you hit any kind of significant milestone in your life, because that item essentially becomes that like a relic of that, and when you pass it down to your children, those things will have stories behind it, and that's how you get remembered. You know what I mean? It's kind of crazy. um, but obviously, like, I'm always okay with people liking what they like, right? And so it took me
Right.
a long time, took me a while to get, I think, mature enough to think that, right? And so, you know, I I was kind of raised with the generation where like anything that was kind of weird or out there was always ridiculed. You know what I mean? Like if you painted a gun neon green and orange, you would be called bad names, right? In this gun industry, right? Especially about a lot of the old school cats. Um, but I learned early on that everyone's okay. It's okay to like what you like, what you like. You know what I mean? It's um, and why are you smiling like that?
Oh, because I remember the ridicule I got from you and Jim and the rest of RD when I asked them to get red Cerakote paint so I could paint my RD 223. One, you guys made fun of me because I was making an AK in 223, which is communist to make a communist rifle in a NATO caliber. So I got made fun of for you. I got made fun for you guys by you guys because I wanted a 223 AK because I could readily find ammo that I could shoot at steel targets with.
Sure.
And then when I said I wanted red Cerakote on the bolt, the gas tube, the grip, and the stock, I remember Jim looked at me like, "You want to do what to my rifle?" And I was like, "I want to make it flashy, so when people see it, they go, 'Wow, that looks really cool.'" And then I can throw in, "Yeah, Rifle Dynamics made it." Now, I'm guessing what he didn't want was people to call up and say, "I want a pink rifle," and all that kind of stuff. So I got it. But I remember, yes, like you said, the first time I was like, "Yeah, I want to make it black and red." It was like, "No, I don't want you to do that." It was like, "Well, I'm going to," so, but I want it. But no, yeah, like you said, as soon as there was a time where it was, I mean, even me and my pants that I wear when I'm shooting. I mean, the first time I showed up on the range, there were a lot of people who were like, no, that guy needs to go away forever. And unfortunately for them,
Yeah.
here I am, like 9 years later, and in the top percentage of the shooters showing up at every match. But I think it also becomes something that when you experience it, you see and you open up to it. Because I think something like that too. You look at like John Sharps. You mentioned him earlier. I had him on the podcast, like episode 8 or 9 or something like that. And we talked about the fact that like when his receivers hit, I don't know if it was necessarily for everybody, but I know that when I saw one of his receivers for the first time ever, it was the Sharkhead one, right? I lit up. I was like, "Holy that is fucking cool! Like hell yes, awesome!" And then people started showing out like the Cerakote jobs, the paint jobs they were doing to make them custom, and I was like, "Yep, it's only making it better for me."
Yeah.
I thought that was super cool.
Right.
So, it's not for everybody, but
Yeah. I mean, I was kind of against. I was raised in that group where it was like, in the gun industry where they're like, "Hey, guns are just tools. Just don't have guns where you can't really enjoy, or it's not really good for home defense or self defense, or not the best, killing machine you can kind of get out there. And then, when I kind of went off on my own and just had really time to reflect, I'm like, you know what? Guns are also just made to be enjoyed. You know what I mean? Like, I like Colt Pythons, right? Because I was like, there's so much history behind it. That's smooth. I'm not gonna use that to like hunt zombies like Rick Grimes, right? But I want to take, I want to go out and shoot that gun just to enjoy it, right? And so it took me a little while, just because I wouldn't say it's brainwashing. It's just older generation's opinions, and I was very impressionable, right, as a young builder, and I adopted all of that as truth, which again, like, when I started my business and I had a performance company, right, there was a race car company, and so they wanted uh, a blue and no, I'm sorry, a purple and white digital camo. I'm like, what? And I was like, oh, well, he needs it as promotional thing, because his cars are just crazy wrap with all these stickers on there, so he wants something wild to kind of match his cars. Makes 100% sense. And then whenever if I post a picture of that, people would just talk all this trash, not knowing that that's not the intended purpose of this gun. I mean, this guy had a bunch of guns out there, a bunch of guns that people couldn't even afford. This guy was, he built some of the fastest race cars in America, and he wanted something just kind of go with this one car he was making, or his style. And so he has plenty of black guns. He has plenty of OD guns. He has plenty of flat dark earth guns or coyote gray, whatever. But he wanted something different to kind of show off to his other clients that, he has all these crazy race cars. And then I was like, okay, well, yeah, like maybe I just had some weird thoughts about all guns should be black or whatever. And I mean, even now I'm getting different clientele that grew up as total nerds and dorks, and they watch anime, right, and read comic books, and play video games, and they're like, hey, can you paint my gun in this video game scheme, right? And they're grown adults that have very successful businesses. Some of them are multimillionaires, some of them are billionaires, right? And like, I'm like, okay, well, now they have money, and like they can kind of do what they like. They can kind of do things that remind them of their childhood, and who am I to judge them for that, right? Because the, the the older generation that does ridicule some younger kid for having something flashy, it's like they're kind of doing a disservice, because it gets them away from the shooting community. They're like, oh, these guys are a bunch of dicks. I don't want to shoot. I don't want to be into guns. But if you show some of these kids some kindness, when they grow up, they'll remember. And if they have money, they'll buy your stuff. It's always kind of happened,
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I mean,
I'll make fun of you for shooting a high point, but I won't make fun of the way it looks. Like, that's,
I mean, we'll make fun of you regardless. And
right.
It just adds one more thing, but it's okay, because you can like what you like, So,
yeah.
Like, some people like things that I think are dumb, right? Like, I don't collect sneakers, right? These days I only collect really watches and knives these days, and guns, but I kind of stepped away from cars and motorcycles, because I was like, I don't go anywhere, right? So, but some guys are into sneakers, and that world's unbelievable, right? They're like, people that don't understand where, like, they'll spend hundreds of thousands of dollars on shoes, and some of them just instantly deteriorate. I don't know if you know or not, but some of those shoes, like, over time, just automatically, like, the materials just crumble, right?
Yep.
But they're spending 5-6 figures on these shoes, and I'm like, that's fine. You can like what you like, right? And so it's
I don't understand it, but
Pokemon cards or whatever, right? And so
Beanie Babies.
Yeah, it's always like something, but I'm like, people like what they like, and who am I to judge, right? And so that's kind of been my different mindset, and I've been getting a lot of like younger clients now, because there's been a huge uptick in early on with the crypto boom, where there was a lot of young kids that made tremendous amount of money by being kids and farming Bitcoin. You know what I mean?
Yep.
I know a guy that farmed 30,000 Bitcoin. You know what I mean? And
Yeah.
so, when he was 14. So
Hmm.
it's like there's a whole clientele of these young kids that have money, and I feel like the older generation is just alienating them by saying, "Oh, that's lame, that's not manly," or whatever. I'm just like, dude, yeah, we'll do whatever you want, right? We'll just make it fun for you. And it took me a long time to recognize that. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, and I feel like I was kind of lucky. I owe a lot of who I am and the way I am today actually to Stone Cold Steve Austin. I know it's weird to say, right?
Yeah.
But when I got into WWF and watching Stone Cold Steve Austin in the era that WWF was in during that time, right? Because it was Stone Cold, it was Degeneration X, it was hey, we got two words for you, suck it, right? Like those were the slogans that I listened to. Give you, I just whipped your ass as Austin 316, right? And it was this era where I felt that his character connected with me in a way where I was going through high school where there's a lot of social pressure and you want to be the popular one, you want to be the cool kid, you want to be the jock, whatever. And when he came out as a character and just the way he presented himself of like, "Oh, you don't like me? Well, let me stun you then." Right? It's like, I don't give a shit if you like me or not. Like,
Right.
what matters is that I'm going to whoop your ass kind of thing.
Right.
And for me, growing up in that time, that's where I started like my last, I think it was my last 2 years of high school. My first 2 years was all about American Eagle and Miller's Outpost or Anchor Blue, and having these name brand things. My junior and senior year in high school, I wore white Hanes undershirts that you could buy, 5 in a pack at Walmart for $8, and then blue Dickie pants, and the only thing I had that was like of value was a famous Stars and Straps belt buckle and belt. But
I thought you were gonna say a black vest with no sleeves, a onesie with your shirtless, bald head, hitting two big
exactly, and then
hits.
yep, and a duct tape gun to my back. Um, but yeah, my junior senior, that's what I wore every day when I went to school or when I went out. I was in a white T-shirt, blue Dickies, and my famous Stars and Straps, and I wore Vans or whatever shoes were on my feet. Like typically, I think they were skater shoes. Um, but I remember a lot of people used to be like, like, weren't you wearing that yesterday? Like, well, I mean, it's a different pair of pants and shirt. I'm not wearing the same one, Like, they're like, well, why don't you change that up? And like, I think even my mom was like, "Are you sure? Like, that's what you want to wear?" And I'm like, "Mom, I don't care. If someone doesn't like me because my shirt doesn't have a Nike swoop on it, then they can suck it. Literally, like I don't care what they think. And if they're gonna judge me based on the fact that I can't or I don't want to wear a Nike shirt, then that says a way hell of a lot more about them as a person than it does about me not wearing it. And if they're going to judge me on something stupid like that, then I know instantaneously I want nothing to do with that person.
Right.
And so it's funny that when I got into the firearms industry, I was lucky enough that one year, and luck would have it, one year I got to meet Stone Cold Steve Austin because he came to SHOT Show with Taryn Butler.
Hmm.
So Taryn introduced me, and like prior to the show, I had gotten sick. I was over the cold, but I had lost my voice. So here is the man that got me through the mental side of the mental anguish of my teenage high school years. That all I want to do is tell him how much I want to thank him. I appreciate everything that he did for me growing up. I would love to buy him a beer, but I can't freaking talk. I'm like, it's all I can get out to him, and I mean, still to this day, I'm just like, oh god, I still need to buy him a beer. I owe him a beer at least. Um, but yeah, like I said, it was I was lucky enough. I feel like early on in my life where I just kind of got that mentality of like, I'm not for everybody. Some people are gonna dislike me, and if they dislike me, that's fine. They don't have to like me. If they do
Right.
like me, then cool, I appreciate it. But I also I'm trying to be nice. I'm trying to be a good person in general. If you think I'm an asshole, then you must have done something to make me give that kind of a reaction off. But
Yeah.
um,
I think
yeah,
with me, because I was a performer as well in high school and all that, right? I was professional breakdancer probably from when I was seventh grade to like 21, probably maybe. And we were a very unique looking group of kids. Like we were called Knucklehead Zoo, and so we looked like a bunch of freaks. Like um, so we were like the first kids that were showing up to these breakdancing events. Everyone's wearing Adidas or looking like super tough, wearing their, any kind of like, windbreaker style stuff. And we were showing up with tank tops on, right? Black tank tops. We had crazy hair, right? We've had, and I wore crazy contact lenses. We all kind of did back then. And we were basically looked like an emo band showing up to these breakdancing events. They're kind of common now, but my head was shaved down in the middle, right? And then this side was like maroon red, and I had a a tail that came down off the side here, and then a Jedi tail that braided that went all the way down, right? So we look like a bunch of freaks, right?
a
And
Jedi tail, nice.
and it actually did. I mean, it made us insanely popular, right? Um, and it was like we were always like, yeah, we were. I mean, we were breakdancing not only to the classic break beats and stuff like that, but we were listening to like Incubus and house music and stuff like that. So we thought way outside the box where people, all the old school guys wanted to fight us because they thought we were ruining the dance, right? And
Mm,
I think somewhere as I got older and joined the firearms industry, I think it was so maybe I was maybe afraid of being so judged, where
mm-hmm.
I figured if these guys are maybe potentially the top of their game, the masters, maybe I should just kind of conform to them and conform to the crowd, so not stick out like a sore thumb for them or put a strike against their company or make them look bad. Kind of very Asian of you, right? To kind of think like, oh, I don't want to bring shame to
Right.
this older gentleman, and so I think I was very young and impressionable, and just kind of developed that mentality where I'm like, okay, well, all guns don't have to be fighting guns, you know,
Mm-hmm.
um, where they thought all guns should be fighting guns. But again, like, when I got my FFL, I built a full auto 1022 because I've always wanted it, right? I've always wanted an auto 22 because I'm like, this is not a combat gun, but it's so fun to shoot, right? It's like one of those carnival BB guns, right? Um,
Yeah.
and so it's at that point I was like, I just want to. Why can't I just enjoy guns, right? Why can't I
Mm-hmm.
just enjoy all guns, right? Some people love like, cap and ball stuff, or you know, um, or lever actions, and whatever people say, lever actions aren't probably a good combat gun compared to what's available out there, right? Um,
Right.
um, no matter how souped up it is, right? And so, but um, yeah, it's kind of weird where like um, you kind of look down upon if you kind of accept people that like wild and crazy things, Um, and I think yeah, somewhere down the line, I think I probably forgot about that just because I wanted acceptance in this community, right? Because there are a lot of Asians in the industry, right? But there are usually a lot of them are behind the scenes, right? They're not usually a face of a company, um, and Asians are respectful. They don't want to bring shame upon you know upon a company, right? Especially if you own it, it's a different story. You can do whatever you want, and I kind of learned that
Right.
early on where I had to put away some of my developed prejudices against people that are they're just wanting to be creative, or they are creative people, right? Life's too short to kind of like not enjoy what you like, right?
Mm-hmm.
So um so I'm all about it. And so but that was an interesting turn that I kind of started when I started my own company. And yeah, it was kind of refreshing, right? When people just want crazy stuff, I'm like, yeah, let's do it, like
Mm-hmm.
Because you can
You
imagine
gotta remember, you gotta think like, creative people are going to piss people off, but
yeah,
there's a reason why creativity um, exists, and it's mostly because it's people that break the mold. There's something that they want to change, and we
yeah,
as humans, we're creatures of habits,
yeah,
right? Like, do you take the same route when you find a good route to go from work to home and back? That's the route you tend to take, and any deviation or detour that you have to take almost is like an inconvenience. Like, oh my, I can't believe I have to exit off of Rainbow instead of Buffalo, right? And
yeah,
and so I think when it comes to anything, it doesn't even have to be firearms. It could be, like, look at perfect example is the snow world. Skiing was the sport, and then someone came out with snowboarding, and everyone was like, "What is that? Get it off our mountain! You're not allowed to be up here." I was like, but now it's in the Olympics and it's a legit sport and all that kind of stuff. But it had to piss a whole lot of people off, except that it was different, and that's just and not every thing is a success or a good idea. So let's make sure that that's clear
yes,
as well. But if you want to try to be creative, if you want to be have that creative energy, just know that you are also going to piss people off. It's just
yep,
comes with the territory. If you're going to be creative, you've got to do something destructive. You have to break something in order to create something new. If
right,
you want to be creative, otherwise you just end up doing the exact same thing that everyone else is doing. We all end up driving, Chevy Sparks or whatever, and
right.
life's boring.
I'm more likely to ridicule you if your gun is trash, right? So
Right.
if it's known to be a trash gun, then I'll be like, all right, that's trash. I don't care what kind of paint job on it. I'll be like, hey, that's a good paint job, but that gun's trash. So
Right.
that's one of the things when I build my guns. I never compromise quality and reliability and accuracy. Um, Speaking of accuracy, I mean, if you ask the Thunder Ranch guy's gun, those guys actually shot one of my guns, and they're recording. I was getting under half or right around half MOA with them with a 16-inch barrel AK, right? So the accuracy is there, but I never would compromise the reliability and quality that was taught by Jim. It's just that I just don't care what the outside looks like, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I'm like, yeah, let your creativity show, but if you want me to compromise like using a terrible part, I'm not going to do it, right? So
Right.
so yeah, as far as like if your gun is trash, then yeah, I probably would ridicule you, but as long as you're shooting, that's fine, right? But if that's all
Mm-hmm.
you can afford, because not everyone can afford a $3,000 gun, $20,000 gun, whatever, right? I understand that, but but if you have the money and you're buying a, you know, $500 turd, I'm gonna make fun of you, right? So, yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah. So,
Right on. Well, I'll tell you what, we're coming up on 2 hours here. We're gonna move on to what I like to do, which is a couple fast fire questions.
okay,
That's how I like to wrap up my podcast and all that kind of stuff. And then afterwards, we'll give you a second to wrap things up for yourself. So the first question for you, being an AK guy, 7.62 or 5.45?
I'll tell you this: that the only personal gun that's not owned by the company I own that I have that's under my name is a 5.45 gun. So, but I invested heavy in 5.45. Meaning I have a ton of ammo for it, a ton of mags, so I have enough to shoot for the rest of my life. 5.45. I just love that round. I think it just shoots so flat, and especially in different profiles. And I know like the 12.5, 12-inch ARs got really popular, but AK guys been doing that for forever, yo. So the 12.5,
OG's representing.
yeah, the 12-inch 5.45 guns are just so good. Now, if it's your first AK, maybe 7.62, and if you don't have all that ammo, maybe 7.62.
Yeah, because it is a little bit of a different story getting that ammo in nowadays than it was back in the day.
Yeah.
So, yep, for sure. All right, PlayStation or Xbox?
Oh, I've always been a PlayStation guy. I was a
we
big.
got to represent.
This is what made me. I was actually a competitive gamer for a long time as well, playing in arcades, usually fighting games. The last one I would play was Marvel vs. Capcom 2. So I was really heavy into competitive gaming when I was a teenager. I mean, like, I would stay at arcades and miss school and just spend 2 days there, no sleep, right? And so I was always the die-hard PlayStation guy. I saved my pennies when I was in 7th grade, and bought a PlayStation 1 with Jumping Flash as the game, where you're like a bunny jumping, right? Resident Evil 1. And then the first Xbox I bought was Xbox 360, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then eventually I ended up getting that Red Ring of Death, and I was like, no more! I shot it with my AK, you know? Xbox 360, surprisingly bulletproof, right? So, and so, and then so, I think my last PlayStation was actually a PlayStation 3. And after that point, I just ran out of time for gaming. So, I haven't played any modern PlayStation games since PS3. And so,
Oh, wow.
yeah, and I've even had games that are still in wrappers. I just like, at that point, I just from then on, I haven't had time to game at all, like at all. The last game I played all the way through was Uncharted 3. But yeah,
I just finished playing that game. I bought like I bought the package deal where you got like Uncharted 2, and Uncharted 3.
Yeah,
from my PlayStation 4.
yeah, and so like it kind of made me sad. I'm like, oh, this part of me is kind of dying, you know. And as the kids get older, they're into gaming, and they're more into the Nintendo stuff, right? Nintendo Switch, and so been playing some of that with them. But it's kind of crazy. I'm like, this was an end of an era when I was like obsessed with games, and then it just stopped. So it was crazy. But I'll always be a PlayStation guy because that was like my first system, and that Red Ring of Death just kind of killed it for me. And so,
yep, I agree. I had an Xbox 360, and did the same thing. That, and then also at the time, PlayStation Network was free if you wanted to play online, but you had to pay. You had to pay for the bundle with the Xbox. So I got rid of my Xbox. But all right, would you rather celebrate St. Patty's Day or Cinco de Mayo?
I mean, the thing is, I'm not a big drinker these days, so I'm like, neither. I think they're both kind of lame.
But you see that, and here's what I see. And now, Grant, maybe this is like we said when we were a little bit older. Before, it was all about the alcohol. Now, it's a matter of, do you want to have corned beef hash and potatoes, or do you want to have tacos? That's the way I see it. Like, what are you going to celebrate on St. Patty's Day? You get corned beef hash and corned beef and cabbage. That's an Irish, dish, which I like because I'm half Irish.
Sure.
But Cinco de Mayo, like, who doesn't like tacos? I'll smash 15 tacos, no problem. So
my big thing is that I have that gene where when I eat cilantro, it tastes like soap. So as much as I love Mexican food, and every time I ask no cilantro, it's always in there. I mean, it's like there's no stopping it. And
so it sounds like you'd celebrate St. Patty's Day then.
I guess I would. Conor McGregor, okay, right? So,
corned beef and cabbage and some potatoes. Like, man, just embrace it. It's good. It really is.
I do love me some corned beef. So
exactly. See, so all right. And then if you are having tacos, do you prefer soft tacos or hard tacos?
Ooh, soft. I know.
Thank you. I was gonna say there's only one right answer to this question. I know it's this or that, but there's really only one right answer. Hard tacos are stupid.
The big
like,
thing...
what other food do we accept where you take the first bite and it explodes in your hand and everything falls out and you're just okay with it? Like, if that happened with your hamburger, you'd be pissed.
That's true. I mean, I understand that if you put a soft one on the outside, like Taco Bell did, that makes sense because then you'll have a texture inside there, right? But,
yes, and you know what it does, though? It also holds the hard shell from exploding.
Yeah, I think that also, like, I've always been like a cleanly guy, so I've always preferred a burrito over a taco, just because I feel like tacos are so messy and they get all over the place, where I can have a controlled thing with the burrito. You know what I mean? So.
Yeah, no, the fact that you have to turn your head to eat a taco is a little weird.
Yes.
Like at one point, someone was creating food, right? And everything, he was like, I'm tired of just, eating like this. I really want to eat like this.
Right.
I'm going to make a food that has to be, I don't know. Tacos are awesome, but only if they're soft tacos.
Very inconvenient when driving as well. So.
Yes, exactly. And I'll say that's why I prefer burritos over tacos too, because you can totally eat a burrito and drive, but a taco you're like, unless it's a soft one, because what you do with a soft taco is that you fold it like a burrito.
Yes.
And then you're able to eat it while you're driving.
Yeah, so soft.
Which
the whole thing
you should
mouth.
not. Yeah. Please make sure you do not eat and drive. We're not encouraging that. Can't stop you from doing it. But
it's fantastic.
So. Yes. Especially if you got a stick shift like I still do. Makes it really fun in traffic.
Better use your time. If your time's limited, eat while you drive. Right?
Yes, exactly. Right. And then, would you rather be able to speak any language, or would you rather speak to animals?
Speak any language. Because I feel like animals probably would just not have anything interesting to say, maybe, or I don't know. I don't think even being in Oregon, I encounter probably animals a lot more than other people do, but they're just like, they just run away. They're gonna say, see ya, every time you see them, see ya, bye.
But what if you could communicate with them and be like, hey, yo, come back, I gotta ask you a question, or hey, I saw a cougar in the area, maybe you ought to chill, relax, you could develop a pretty good imagine how good it would be to have a hawk for a friend.
I know, but who said they'll be your friend? Just because you talk to somebody doesn't mean they'll be your friend.
Dude, I'm just saying, wild animals that you feed tend to just show up and be a little bit more friendly to the person that feeds them than they do not, right? So if you could actually communicate, what about a bear, right? Bear's like, rah, and you're like, whoa, bro, we're good. Who's to say a bear wouldn't be like, whoa, we're good? Oh, I thought you were coming to kill me because, that's typically what you humans do. That's why the aliens haven't come to visit us yet, because the first thing that would happen is they'd catch a 9mm to the big old bulging eye, and then they'd be dissected.
Or have they visited us? But
they have. I have a theory.
I think that if you could talk to animals, again, they'll still be skittish. They wouldn't trust humans. I think the time you talk to them would be at a zoo, and the whole time they'll be like, kill me, please. Kill me. I think it would just be such a sad scene where if I can talk to someone in some foreign country, if I get taken, and Liam Neeson doesn't save me, I can understand what they say. It just seems like it's a lot more practical to know human language, where you can be like, yeah, please don't sell me as a sex slave.
Or you could even say, I'm going to kill you as soon as I get out of this. And they're like, oh my gosh, you speak Russian?
Or you can say, I can translate for you. This person is saying this or that. I think it'll just be a lot more practical than being like, bye, bear. Bye, raccoon. I'm eating my trash, raccoon. And the raccoon's like, screw you, son. I'm going to eat your trash as much as I want. And it's like, okay.
Well, see, then you could also do the warning. Be like, hey, eat another piece of my trash, and you're going to get a suppressed 22 to the dome.
Then he'll be like, catch me if you can, right? It's always going to be like some kind of I have a feeling a raccoon would be like a little dick, because they just don't care, And so they're going to be like, all right, well, I'm going to fight your dog next time I see your dog. And so
I've seen Incredibles 2, Jack doing battle with the raccoon for sure.
Yeah, and so I don't know, because I think the animals, no matter what, most of the time would be skittish, but it would be interesting to talk to my own dog. But I think I'll just be disappointed, being like, this dog is so dumb. He'll just be like Doug from Up, or he'll be like, hi friend, let's play. The same things that you think that they're thinking anyway, right? I'm hungry, right?
Yeah,
so that's my
true.
thing. And I see a lot of animals here. I mean, we have all kinds. We have bald eagles. We got everything, right? And we got bears and elk and all kinds of monsters that live in the ocean and the woods. But they're so skittish. You know what I mean?
Yeah, well, and I keep my ass out of monster soup anyway. I hate.
Yeah, because who's to say a bear's not gonna eat you just because you can talk to them? You know what I mean? So.
Yeah, but I mean, at least you could explain, what's going on. Why you put a 10mm in his chest was because he was trying to eat you. But
I kind of think we have a mistake that they'll have the same intelligence as humans, where they would be able to understand instead of just knowing basic instinct stuff like I'm hungry, I'm angry, I'm afraid. So I think it would just be that, and I'm like, oh, this is a waste. Where I can tell some guy in Zimbabwe that, hey, I want to eat that monkey leg or something. You know what I mean? So it's like,
Okay, yes, you make a good point.
yeah.
I don't get me wrong. I actually feel like I would want to speak any language too, because I just think that would be cool to listen to people shit talk about me without them knowing that I know what they're saying, and then to all of a sudden just drop it on them in their own language and be like, "Oh yeah, is that what you think? Let me tell you what I think of you," and they'll be like, "Oh my gosh, I didn't realize." So
Plus, you're a hunter, so after you shoot that deer, they'll be like, "Why, John? I was a friend of your daughter's."
yeah, there is a little bit of bliss within that ignorance of not having to hear a deer as it runs away, saying, "Ow!
There, I think I
Ow!
lost
God,
you.
what the hell is that? Who shot me? Why is there an arrow
Frozen.
hanging in my side?" All right, Billy. Well, hey, I appreciate you coming on, chatting with me, telling everyone your story and all that kind of stuff. So I like to wrap things up by giving you an opportunity. If there's any companies you want to give a shout out to, or any people, or anything like that, go ahead and the floor is yours. So.
Okay, so thanks for listening, everyone. My firearms company is Ironborn Armory, and you can mostly find us on Instagram, Instagram.com/IronbornArmory. You can see my knife work at same thing, Instagram.com/Chogun no spaces. And also, I have a knife group on Facebook that's pretty private, but that's where I usually post daily and show the projects I'm working on. I also do have a Cerakoting business, but I mostly cater to OEMs. So if you're interested in OEM and want products done, you could hit me up for that. We do a lot of OEM companies that I'm not allowed to say, but they're big companies. And if you're interested in attending our knife show, it's usually every July in Oregon. It's called the Pacific Northwest Custom Invitational. We do have a Facebook group for that as well that has about 1,500 members. If you're interested in checking out a knife show. So thanks. Glad to be on here, John. Appreciate it.
Word. Exactly. No, it was good to be able to catch up. It has been a long time, ever since we were in Vegas, probably the last time we got to hang out and see each other. So yeah, it's just good to catch up. So, well, again, thank you so much for coming on board and chatting with me. And with that being said, thank you all that are listening. Appreciate you.
Yeah, man. I told you it'd be a long one.
It's about what it is. So, but with that being said, thank you all so much. Again, this was Open Action with me, John McClain, brought to you by Armscor Precision. And until the next episode, see you later.